First of all, this is a meeting, it's not a summit. I wrote a book called Berlin 1961, which looked at the Vienna summit between Kennedy and Khrushchev. Right. It was 2 days, it was dinners, it was wives.
Can we just take one step back? Let's go through the nomenclature, because everybody seems to be back and forth about whether it's a summit or whether it's a meeting. And I would just ask why.
Well, you need something to sign in a summit.
Look, Nick has done this on the policy side, so he can answer it. My own view is when you're meeting at the head of government, head of state, it's a summit.
Pretty big.
But in terms of actual dinners and all this,
this is just about pomp and circumstance.
But here's what's important: don't forget that Khrushchev took the measure of Kennedy at that time, considered him to be weak. 2 months later, we had the building of the Berlin Wall, and a year after that, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis. So bad things can happen after summits. They don't usually happen at the summits. And you have now, we're looking at 5 baskets. One of them is arms control. You could have some good news there. Syria, you already have the Russians moving in on the southwest. They've broken the ceasefire, and they're supporting Assad to move on there, and they would like to have Assad recognized, and they would like to have the U.S. eventually get out. So you have arms control, you have Syria, you have Ukraine, you have election meddling, and then you have the atmospherics of the whole thing. So I think it's worth, in the next hours, watching whatever comes out on any of those 5 areas.
But talk about this idea of threading this needle. And Joe's right to the extent that there is a huge community of people in the U.S. that are very anxious about this meeting and what it means and how we're going to treat Russia relative to our allies, and what has been said over the past several weeks, whether it's been about NATO or Theresa May or Justin Trudeau, and how we actually get through.
I think, the president's right to meet Trump. A lot of people criticize Putin, excuse me. A lot of people criticize Trump for going to the summit. This is the worst relationship we've had with Russia, with Moscow, say, before the end of the Cold War. You have to go back to the early 80s before Gorbachev. No trust, no communication. And given the stakes involved, these two people should know each other. They should try to find a way to work together.
Because if you could get to that level of trust that you're talking about, there's going to be other people on the other side that are going to say, we can't trust that.
A little too much trust.
Right now, the United States should not be in a position to compromise on anything. Right now, you've got Putin annexing Crimea. We can't give way on that. If the president gave way on sanctions against Crimea, he'd face hostility on Capitol Hill. I think he'd have a revolt from the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense if he did that, and certainly from the allies. Right. Second, given the grand jury indictment, which talks about a criminal conspiracy of 12 Russian military intelligence officials, the first cyber attack against the United States from Russia, the first big one, which happened 2 years ago, there's been no response from the United States. The president, even in the tweet this morning, doesn't acknowledge it. He hasn't prepared the country. So rather than just ask Putin, hey, did you launch a cyber attack against the United States? He's got to go at him and warn him about consequences if it happens again. I think most members of the Senate agree with that. So that's part of the standard of what has to happen today.
Do you think that's what's going to happen today?
No, I don't. If you look at the tweet, the president's even denying that there was a cyber attack.
But you think he should be meeting with him?
I do. Yeah. But I think the president, as Fred says, you've got to have some strength here. And you've got to show Putin there are going to be consequences when he crosses a line that we've drawn, whether it's Trump a line or Obama line or a George W. Bush line.
Well, I was going to go back to George W. Bush meeting with Putin, saying he could see into his soul when he met with him. I mean, you need to meet with him, but you need to do what when you're there? And I guess this is your...
You have to establish a relationship of expectations. And right now, there's 2 big lines have been crossed. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the cyber attack, which is what it was. It wasn't just spreading fake news on Facebook. It was a cyber attack against 23 American state electoral commissions. That's a very detailed grand jury indictment that came out on Friday. And it does, it has to make us think about how we defend, and part of that has to happen today. The president has to be strong on this.
What are our allies thinking right now? What are they watching for? What's China as they're watching this? What is the EU looking for right now?
There's an EU-China summit taking place at the same time, and they're drilling down on these tariffs, and they may form a sort of coalition to fight back against what they view as American protectionism. So the Chinese are trying to take advantage of this here and there. I think what our allies are going to be watching on the upside, if there's progress on arms control. There have been one of the most successful arms control agreements of all time was the 1987 INF agreement on medium-range missiles, removed medium-range missiles, nuclear missiles from Europe. Russia looks to be violating this. What will happen there? A renewal of the New START agreement, which runs out February 2021. It looks as though that's actually established levels, so that's positive. Negative, some sort of trade, Syria for Ukraine, where the president becomes softer on sanctions, so I don't know how he does that with Congress having voted the way it does, but where he cedes that Assad's going to be in charge, that he's going to allow the Russians to move forward with their allies, and that Putin gives some lip service to the fact that he's going to pull Iran back from the Israeli border and reduce Iran's role in Syria. But I don't really know how Putin delivers that. So these are the things to watch. Positive, arms control. Negative, Syria.
One topic you haven't raised, I'm curious whether you think it'll get raised. North Korea, will North Korea get raised during this conversation anyway?
I think it will. Putin's going to meet Kim Jong-un in the next couple of weeks. The Russians have always been part of this. They're not as influential economically on North Korea as is China. But Putin, you don't want Putin to be a troublemaker. So I think there's an opportunity for Donald Trump in two areas today. One is to get Putin to buy into the Trump strategy on North Korea. Second is on nuclear weapon stability, because that's what you have to worry about. That's why you want to have these two guys meet. And they've got strategic missiles and they've got intermediate missiles, and we need to have new agreements on both.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.